our last but not least lecturer is Anna Petruseva from BIRN Skopje. So I won't be telling too much on because, as you can see from her biography, she's a really experienced journalist, and she's one of the founders of BIRN Original Network. And as you know, that BIRN was awarded. And as you saw from the agenda, there are a lot of things that Anna was working on, so I wouldn't be taking much of her time. I would let her introduce herself and start the lecture, because it would be a little unusual, maybe, start of the lecture from what we had so far, and I hope that you're going to enjoy it.
Okay, so hi from the Balkan capital of COVID, unfortunately, where we're experiencing this explosion of the contagion, primarily due to different weddings and dinners and slavas and as it goes in the region. And I need to apologize in advance if we have an incident during the lecture, because I had no option of finding anyone to take care of my dog. So if you see a dog jumping at me, you will forgive that intrusion. Okay, so I can imagine that you've all been exhausted and you've had quite a lot of material to digest. And I was hoping that this would not be so much of a lecture as much as a discussion and an exchange of views. And if you don't mind, I would give you different examples and tell you what the situation here is and how journalism is battling with the pandemic of fake news or false information. But before we do that, I will send in the chat one link for a YouTube video, and I would like us all to see it first and then continue the discussion. Okay? Okay, here it is. So I thought that this would be kind of fitting, given that our overarching topic is integrity of the program, and I know it's a parody, and it's different people react to it differently. Anyone, any thoughts? Do you think it was stupid? Did you think it was funny?
I thought it was hilarious.
Yeah, okay. Because it's so close to the truth, or?
I think that it was funny and scary.
Yeah.
I think that it was sad in a comic way.
That's a good point. Given how much I, for one, for example, and I'm sure that many people, especially, well, not just in the region, but in the US as well, are nowadays choosing to get their news from satire and parody. Like if you look at examples like The Daily Show or Colbert, or in Serbia, Zoran Kesic and 24, for someone to put that into context, or John Oliver. So I will share with you my presentation. I think it's there. Okay, so basically, journalists now do not only have to worry about their stories. There were plenty of minefields in journalism as it was prior to this situation now. And when I'm saying this situation, I don't mean of the current pandemic, but rather than the infodemic that we're living in this so-called post-truth world, where it is becoming, the lines are being frequently more and more blurred between fact and then whatever you want to call it, whether it's false information or alternative facts or alternative reality, factoids, and so on. So, for instance, just today, at my newsroom, we had a lengthy discussion about what to do and how to address a problem that we've been having since we launched our separate publication in Macedonia, which is how do we prevent other publications of stealing our content, which is, I think, an issue that every newsroom is dealing with. Because since social media took over basically the information channels and became the primary source of information, what professional media did is they lost their gatekeepers role. And since then, they have been having trouble how to bring the facts and how to bring the stories to the public, which are not contaminated by the noise that social networks create. And one of the ways that journalists have to continue doing their job is sticking to standards. And I'll elaborate later on how to do that. But what we have as a situation at the moment is that journalists have to battle on different fronts. On one hand, you have professional media who have more and more limited resources and newsrooms. Like, for instance, when I was starting in journalism, you had to have different beats in a newspaper, different beats in a TV station. There would be a separate journalist who would be devoted, focused, specialized in only health issues or education issues, police, and security, foreign policy. Today, that's not the case. And today, newsrooms are small. Journalists are expected to do pretty much everything, depending on the media. And on top of that, they do not have the time, because the time works for the plenty one-man-led media, who are usually just copy-pasting other people's content and just churning out a lot of content to generate more and more traffic and advertisement. And in that battle, what is the main victim is accuracy, facts, and all angles of a certain story. So let me start with several examples of what we have been seeing lately. I don't know how many of you have any of you been dealing with researching or being a victim or had any kind of personal experience with false information?
No, I was just going to ask what if we have read something false or we have read by our own.
No, I meant usually with your stories. Have you had a problem that, for instance, you have written a story and that story has been published, and then someone else takes your story and publishes it as if it's their own?
No. For me, it hasn't happened.
For us, for instance, that is something that occurs regularly, and that other media, who, as I said again, are not really media, would take your content or your photos, and they would even sign their names and publish them, and so on. But okay, let me then continue with just some basic stuff. Basically, fake news is usually information that has been deliberately fabricated, or parts of real information have been taken and framed with false information and then published with the intention to steer falsehoods, for propaganda, to harm someone, or just to undermine trust. There are mainly three types of information when we talk about disinformation, and that is disinformation that is false and deliberately created to harm a person, misinformation that is false but has not been created with an intent to cause harm. Like, for instance, we are talking here more about mistakes and wrong dates, wrong names, information that cannot so much cause damage, and malinformation, which is information that is particularly intended to inflict harm on different people or groups, or to discredit people, different political opponents, and so on. So these are kind of the main divisions between the different groups of misinformation. In Macedonia, particularly, for instance, just to illustrate what kind of situation we're dealing with, and I think that given the history of the region, I think that the situation is similar across. I'm sure it is very similar in Serbia, in Albania, where you have zillion media that totally does not go in line with the number of population. Like, for instance, in Macedonia, you have 2 million people, but you have 120 TV stations and radio stations. You have almost 30,000 websites that are registered on the domain MK. And that means that they are all fighting for the same space. Now, for instance, we were investigating in Macedonia, they changed the law. So now the political party advertising for elections, and you probably know we have elections on July 15th, the advertising is now paid by the state, by the budget, by me. I'm paying it. Paid taxpayers are paying the money so that political parties can have their advertisements in different media. Among other things, now those advertisements are not going only to TV and radio, they're going to websites. On the call that the State Election Commission published several months ago before the pandemic for websites to register so that they can receive political advertisements, 230 something websites applied. These 235 websites are basically in the same category like the professional media. Out of these, big numbers, hundreds I would say, are the ones that have one person and can only copy paste and take other people's content. As everywhere else, that's not been regulated, so there's no way for us as media to protect ourselves, except for trying to and the way we have focused ourselves, that we have thought that it would be a good way to battle that is to expose who are these media. So what we do is we expose the background of this media, who they are, who is behind them. Is it a company? Is it a personality? Is it an individual connected or organization connected in any way to political parties? Whether it is what kind of agenda they have, whether they're disseminating false information, and so on and so forth. But allow me to go first through these 7 types. We've already mentioned satire, and satire has no intention to cause harm, but it has very often the potential to fool. So we have had numerous situations, for instance, in the media, but very often we have a situation where you have news from satirical websites which are then taken by media and portrayed as if they're real. So, for instance, we've had a notorious example in this country where the very famous worldly website that does parody The Onion had the news about how entire Greek history is made up. And a very prominent newspaper in Macedonia, a journalist took that and wrote a comment how there it is, finally the proof that Greek history has been fabricated and invented and something. So it was a huge embarrassment. But that also happens with the different satirical news, whether they come from Albania or Serbia or other places. Then we have the misleading content when information is used. When a misleading information is used to frame an issue or an individual in a negative way. We have imposter content. On this, we had a big case yesterday here. There is quite a prominent website that is called Sakam da Kažem, which means I want to say. And this is quite a credible website that does news. It's an information website. And you are all aware of this drama with 5G, Corona, Bill Gates, Melinda Gates, vaccinations, and so on. So what they did is some Twitter users and then bots took and doctored, they slapped on the logo, and you have it in the presentation on page 11. So they slapped the logo of the media, and they did the classic thing. They said the elections on the 15th July, which is true, we will have elections on the 15th July. And then the headline reads, the elections on 15th July will be used so that we are vaccinated through the project of Bill and Melinda Gates. And this is circulated as content for those advocating for people not to go out and vote, but to boycott elections. And it is questionable to how many thousands and thousands this content arrived and reached before the website and his editor, published news and explained and said someone had used our logo. This is not our logo. This is not our content. We would never publish something like that, and so on. But this is being done. This kind of examples all the time. Then we have totally fabricated content, which is designed on its own to deceive and to cause harm. And the example in this case would be just that we would be vaccinated, without the date. And also we see making false connections, like when headlines or photos are not supported in the article itself. When genuine content is shared with false contextual information, and this is done very often with recycled old content, or when genuine information or imagery is forged in order to deceive. When we come to, in our case, I think in the region, it is usually mostly these two: imposter content, when something is presented as if it's coming from another source. Like there was a big story 2 weeks ago that Forbes magazine, Forbes magazine, had published a list of safest countries, the most safe countries from Corona. And Macedonia was somewhere low, like it was 150 or something. But this was at a time before this last explosion of cases happened, when the country had very, very few cases. And then for days, it was used by politicians, by media, for criticism against the authorities, to show that this country ranks among the worst, before journalists actually looked up and found that, in fact, this had nothing to do with Forbes. It was something that was quoted in Forbes, but obviously from another source. And then once they looked at the other source of the information, they came to find that it was some dodgy foundation owned by a Russian businessman, and so on and so forth, and that this foundation never actually provided any kind of solid methodology for this research, or how they compiled that data and so on, but also had very problematic facts or information within the research that, for instance, said that, let's say, Bulgaria was worse off with Corona than Spain, which, is entirely not logical. Which brings me to my point when it comes to news sources. News sources have to be inspected closely and always. Do you, and I have a question for you, do you read the same news, like how many of the same news sources do you use? Do you change the sources of information frequently? Do you use primarily Facebook, or you use website pages? Do you ever check who is behind those website pages?
Can I say something?
Yes.
Working in a website, I have worked for 6 months in website news, and we take the information mostly from Facebook pages and from website. But referring to the politicians, we take the status they make in the Facebook, and then we do the news. This is mostly the source we have to do the news for the website.
But when you say Facebook pages, what do you mean? Do you mean, like, let's say, if I were to write that I feel like I'm dying and I have corona, but I went to the hospital and they sent me back. If I write that on Facebook, would you publish that?
Not everything who is published in Facebook we can write about it, but mostly we saw the pages of politicians and the pages of persons who we think that they were capable of writing something that the audience is interested.
Okay, but when you say politicians, that's usually what they say, like statements and stuff, yeah?
Events, they take places, opinions about what happened in politicians. That's
no. Do you ever use, actually? Do you use Facebook and Twitter for writing for stories? And how?
No, maybe just to find sources.
Okay.
And I always check them, check profiles, and Google them and everything. In that way, just in that way.
Okay, so the example I gave, if you would see a post that someone wrote, someone you don't know, that elaborates how they're dying of corona and they went to the hospital and the hospital turned them back and so on, what would you do?
I think that we should see if this is true and communicate with the person
Absolutely,
of
yeah.
the post. Because if the page isn't official, then it's not been right.
Yeah. Well, the page cannot be official if it's an ordinary person. I mean, it's an ordinary person from a village somewhere. You don't know this person. It's not a politician. But I'm giving this example because this is, for instance, a real example, and this has happened. Of course, I didn't write it. Someone wrote it, and that is exactly how you see the power of social media. One website takes it and publishes it, and the website, their stance, I mean, one, they don't care, like as we saw in the video, but this is clickable, this is interesting, and this also works my personal agenda that I want to say that everything is terrible in this country and the authorities are to blame and so on and so forth. So they publish, and then another website publishes, and another website, and before you know it, in a matter of minutes, you have 20 news sources that are saying that this person went to the hospital and is about to die, and they were turned back because of I don't know what. And in many cases, unfortunately, the way it spreads, because it spreads like a wildfire, and this is why I mentioned previously accuracy. As you said the thing, you would contact the person and you would ask them whether it's true. But is that enough? Because this person could also have an agenda. You don't know this person. You may contact them on Facebook. They may give you a phone number, but you have to verify whether it is true.
We can contact also with the hospital to
Absolutely.
see their opinion.
That is the next logical step. You check the hospital. In this case, in the case that I was elaborating, the hospital, it took time to check the hospital because journalists need time. They cannot just put out there anything. They have to vet, they have to check the information, and they have to guarantee that that information is true. By the time they checked the hospital, the information was all over the place. And then trying to, dealing with fake news, with false information is like trying to collect as if you would, you tear apart a pillow and you throw the feathers everywhere, and then you're trying to collect them one by one. Of course, throwing them around would be much, much faster and much easier. This is then very difficult. And it's always a question whether the information following the fake news would in fact reach the same number of people. Yes.
I want to ask you now, should we also check the previous post on Facebook, on Twitter, or when somebody is not writing a lot and then publish something like that, or is writing something so stupid for a long time, it's also a person we cannot trust?
We abide to very high standards, and I would personally never, just like as a rule, I would only publish something from Facebook in extreme circumstances. I'm not talking about the politicians and that have now used, they are now using Facebook and Twitter as a channel. But that also doesn't mean that it is legit. It depends on what they say. So, for instance, if they say to me, if you have a politician's statement that this one has killed that one, that can also be libelous and problematic. But what I'm trying to say now is that you have to be extremely vigilant when it comes to especially using stuff from social media. That has to be verified. You should never use something that someone said without trying to double check it, because that is the main difference between what anyone on the street can say. Like, I can show you that it's now sunny, yeah, and I can convince you, I can now insist that it's raining. You see what I mean? So unless you see with your own eyes, would you believe me that it's raining? That information has to be verified. And there are ways to do that. And especially when it comes to media, I've put down some tips and tricks for you to, just some as a guideline for you to know just what to look out for. One, I think you should always be very skeptical. Always. Like, always think of ulterior motives. Whatever the website is, it could be like the most kind of health and beauty and this and that. That doesn't mean that it is not also part of the dissemination machine. So you always have to be extremely skeptical. And when you look at the source, like, say you have a certain website, which you have not seen before, but the information is very intriguing. So what do you look for? If the title screams at you, that's kind of always a good hint that something is wrong. If it makes you very emotional, if it makes you very angry, if it is like, and here we discover, or here's how, there's always like, we reveal, we find. So look at the article, check the date. Nowadays, one of the biggest manipulations, what are the things that are being done, is with churning out old content, like people sharing stories from 2011 like they were yesterday or today. Look at the date. Look at the author. Do you know him? Does it ring a bell? Does it sound like it's a made-up name? Look at the story. What does it say? Does it seem plausible? Does it have sources? If it doesn't have sources, it is we learned, we can reveal, and no sources, that should be a huge red flag. Is there anyone challenging? If there are sources who are saying the government is hiding the number of deceased from COVID, is there anyone on the other side challenging that? Is there anyone from the government? Who is the person making the claim? Do they have a special interest? Do they have their own personal agenda? Is it a relevant person? Like, you always have to think, you have a doctor, which is irrelevant, and you have some wacko who says vaccines will kill you and you should, go to a tarot reading. So the two do not have the same weight, right? Are you following me? Yeah? Okay. So other stuff, look at the website. What kind of publication is it? Look at its front page. What kind of stories are they giving? Can these stories actually give you a hint of their agenda, of their policies? You could actually really easily tell if you look at 5-6 headlines on the front page whether it is a legitimate thing or not, or just kind of hunting for clicks and advertisements. Do they have an impressum? Is it listed who this media belongs to? Is there an editor? Is there a list of journalists? Is there a company behind it? Look at all countries have a separate search engine where you can check the domain. Like, for instance, in our case, it's this website called marnet.mk. And when you type in any kind of, like, if you type in my publication, Prisma MK, it will show you that it was registered on that date by Balkan Investigative Reporting Network, has, belongs to the organization Balkan Investigative, and so on and so forth. This is how, and I've put in some links as well for you for how to look at, how to find, to check websites, who they belong to. Now, that game has changed. It has become much more sophisticated, and there are much more tools to hide who is behind a certain website. And this has been especially a trend in the last several years, but there are still ways where you can track. Then to go back to the story itself, have you seen that story anywhere else? Just putting in the headline in Google, in search, will show you where this story has showed up. But be very careful. If you type in a headline of a story, it does not, and it gives you 500 results or 300 results, that is in no way sign that it is legitimate. It will show you, because fake news also is spreading extremely fast. But one thing that it will give you an idea of what kind of websites have shared the same news, and that should be very telling. And most important of everything, how many credible sources have shared this story? Do you have any mainstream relevant media that you trust, that you see that have shared this story? There could be many, these days, there are so many ways of manipulating readers. And that's why I think that probably also unfairly, but the audience also, and it's no wonder that we're seeing all over the region these massive media literacy campaigns where people are trying to educate audiences what to look for and how to find these red flags and how to be able to recognize when someone is manipulating you. Like, for instance, we have had situations where at a time when, say, the government, this was a couple of years back, the time when the government was trying to stoke ethnic tensions. And what they did is, through numerous websites of their own. They carried a photo of Albanian football fans at a stadium saying Albanian protesters and hooligans will come to Skopje and they will start incidents and do that and do that. And we tracked the photo that it was actually 5 years old, and it was a legitimate photo of football fans in Tribina, in a stadium that had nothing to do with the problems at that time or these protests that they were put in context to. So there are minefields everywhere, and people really have to be extremely careful. And you, especially as journalists, have an obligation to make sure that you have your facts straight. That is why you should always be extremely vigilant before sharing or using or referring, especially, to content like this. Another point that I wanted to make on this topic was that it is also very often very often the case with politicians. And this is a tricky one, and it is a particularly problematic issue, because what do you do when politicians lie? Anyone? Any idea? Like, if they would blatantly lie, what do you do as a journalist? What is your job?
We write that they are lying.
Okay. And how do you do that?
By putting the news when he lies and the truth.
Yes, but that is only in a case where you can easily prove it. Very often they make claims like one of the things that I think the new era in media has brought, and that is mainly due to Twitter and Facebook, is that you have journalism has been suffering for a while now, but I think now especially you have a situation, I don't know whether this is the truth, whether this is the case in your countries, but for instance, here in most, maybe not all, but I would say overwhelming majority of cases, when, let's say, a politician is in a TV studio and is answering questions in an interview, more often than not, if he's lying or is giving false information, the journalist is playing no role whatsoever. They don't stop them. They don't say, well, but that's not true. They don't offer counter arguments why that is not true. As I said, not all, but in many, many cases, that is just being more and more seen as an acceptable practice. And I'm saying this because, why? Because I think that we all have a duty as journalists, and sometimes you can't do it in the moment, but if you can, but in every possible opportunity, journalists have to, gather the facts, present the facts, and show that certain falsehoods presented by politicians are precisely that, falsehoods. And, politicians do that for various reasons. Sometimes they do it for fun. Sometimes they do it for propaganda. We had, and I have that somewhere in, you can just open the presentation. We have, okay, if you go to page 17, what do you see? See a photo, yeah? Okay, so the person in the photo on page 17 is the Deputy Prime Minister for European integration, and his name is Bujar Osmani. And he tweeted this photo of him shaking hands with the Pope when the Pope was in Skopje last year. The only problem with this photo, as you can see on page 18, is that there were a bunch of other people in that photo that the Deputy Prime Minister decided to delete in Photoshop. But as he was deleting that, he forgot to, I don't know if you can see, like right on his forehead, he kind of left the ear of one of his colleagues that he didn't cut out. So that's there. See? And why? Because it would have looked better if he's alone. I mean, needless to say, he was caught very, very soon. And we had a similar example, which was not Photoshop, but now now because of the different economic measures that the government is doing to help out people because of the pandemic, the government has decided to give to like the most socially endangered categories of people vouchers, coupons to go worth 100 euros to have a vacation at home meaning in the country. And there was this big campaign called Home is Home, Doma si je doma, that was supposed to promote the beauties of the country and people going on vacation in the country. Now, I'm not much of a patriot, but I think that Macedonia is really a beautiful country and it has quite a lot of beautiful mountains, lakes, and so on. However, the people who were doing the website that was supposed to promote these tourist coupons decided for some reason to put stock photos of a lake in Germany, a lake in France, some beach in Thailand or something. Totally, totally bizarre. And that was, again, then a huge public outcry because rightfully so, people thought that it is unacceptable that something like that, an initiative like that, should be promoted with places elsewhere. Now, to go back to our topic, I have put here some tips about where to look, where you can check photos, and so on. I would. You have MetaPix, but also some other tools that you can check out, where you can check the metadata of the photo, it was taken by who, when, and so on. The same way you can check also documents. Be very careful, since we were talking about social media. When you're using social media, if you're using social media in your stories, be very careful to check what we mentioned previously, whether it is an official account, whether it is someone, there is a very popular Twitter account called Angela Merkel, Queen of Europe, which is actually a parody, and more than often people are taking it seriously and think that is so you want to avoid any kind of embarrassment like that. And also be very careful that I don't know what is the situation in your countries, but here, for instance, especially the websites that have a history of publishing falsehoods, very often do their sweeps, and so let's say in a month or so, whenever some problematic news were published, whenever you click, there's 404 and so on. So it was always good if you use stuff, if you refer to websites, always save the link, but also do a print screen because stuff gets deleted. And you can check as well for archives. You can go on Google Cache or Wayback Machine for older content, that has been deleted or you cannot find at the moment. I've been speaking for quite a lot. Do you have any comments or questions? Do you know usually this stuff? Is any of this new? Do you have issues with any kind of fact checking? Yes.
I just wanted to tell you a story, the most fresh story from Pančeva. I'm from Pančeva, Serbia.
Okay.
We had a situation last week that the government cut the trees in the park near the parking to spread that parking. And the second day, there was a big fence long around new trees, and people suggested that they will cut more trees and to spread that parking. And then they make a protest. And one day they pull off that fence, and our TV station, which is now really politicized, I think that is a mall information about that hooligans from Belgrade came and they pulled that fence and everything, and it is such a mess in the city now because of that. And now it's police standing there, like, and that false information are spreading all the time now, and it's now before the election, so it's really confusing and really bad situation, and you don't know what to do. Situation is that I'm working in a local newspaper, and we are neutral, and we didn't do nothing. We didn't wrote about that situation because of election and everything, because the government is paying now commercials and everything. So I want to tell you just how messy is here.
Yeah, but when you say we're neutral, you were not writing about that at all, or?
We are writing about problems in the city.
No, but I mean about this particular situation.
I don't know why do we choose to not write, because our newspaper was wrapped with commercials about elections of leading party.
Okay.
Yeah. So it is really bad because people just wanted to protest because this is a city with a big factories. They're with the pollution, and they made a story that some hooligans came in, made a mess in the city. So
yeah, just like in Salamal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some hooligans. Yeah. Okay. Are you finding this useful? Do you usually go through the fact-checking process in your reporting?
I can answer. I finished a couple courses about media literacy.
Okay.
And I know about that tips and tricks, and but I'm usually very careful because when I search for sources and information, I look, I check websites. I'm going also on the databases of APR, do you know what when they are founded and everything, and I check about grammar also. When it's bad grammar, it's also false. And check
I find that I hate that. That's one of my when I see typos and
photos also, and I'm googling people and looking at their profiles also when I'm searching for sources. So, but I'm very careful when I'm searching for people, and information.
Yeah, as one should be. Yeah. I mean, because it's at the end of the day, for us, it's all about credibility. And it takes ages to build your credibility and to build your reputation. And it takes one mistake for all of it to go away. It can just go away overnight. And that is why always have to be, I mean, we are always extremely, extremely careful when we approach, especially because we do investigative journalism, which involves a lot of powerful people and a lot of, companies, and it can be extremely difficult and dangerous, and you just have no room for mistakes, because we've seen over and over again that for instance, I remember very well when we had that big story about Tamnava 5 years ago, and that story draw a dramatic reaction from Vucic, and as a result, in 1 week alone, there were over 300 stories in the Serbian press against Birn. Not one of them was dealing with what the story was about, which was essentially a corruption story. But there were 300 reports about how Birn are corrupt, mercenaries, EU mercenaries, working for Kosovo, working for this, just trying to kind of attack us and our individual journalists, rather than, but those are the new styles of the autocrats in the Balkans.
But that's the only thing that they have, defamation. That's the only thing that they have, to attack journalists, ad hominem, and then, try to not deal with the issue, but with the person actually, who made the statement, wrote an article or whatever. Old school.
Yeah, exactly. Did you guys have any other questions? Yeah, I know with the video.
I have always the same question for investigative journalists. That is, how do you manage to have your source?
How do you manage to have your sources?
Because it is the main thing, isn't it?
Yes and no. Mm-hmm. Yes and no. I think for me, I think it's more about the right idea than the right source. Because you need the right idea to start digging, to start going after your story. Like, for instance, I remember very well when I came to my newsroom and I said to them in 2014, I said, look, everybody's talking about this Skopje revamp project, and it's going to be monstrous and it's going to be expensive and everybody wants to know about it. And the government is shut for information. Individual journalists are getting bits and pieces, but it's such a tiny part. And I said, look, there has to be a way. I really believe that if one is tenacious enough, stubborn enough, and persistent enough, you can go really, really far. So I said, okay, nobody has done it. And it's obviously, story of our lifetime, how much this bloody thing costs. And we had no idea at the time. The buildings were just starting to come out and so on. And we started, and a year later, or less than a year later, we published this huge database with thousands of documents documenting 560 million euros. The next year, and then we kept on updating it. And when we stopped updating it because they stopped building it, we were at the number of 684 million. And none of it is an estimate. None of it is a source. We did have sources, but the sources were not crucial. They were very important because, one sources can always be great sources where to find sources and where to find documents and what doors to knock on. But I think that, we kept on insisting. We bombarded institutions with FOIA requests, Freedom of Information requests. And, 5 would ignore you, the other 5 would give you. And then you go to the first 5 and you say, but these 5 gave me, why don't you give me? And you do tricks like that. Or you say to institutions, you bluff. You say, I actually have these documents, they were given to me, but I just need to double check whether they've been doctored or not, and stuff like that. So I think that it's easier once you build a reputation of working on certain type of stories. It gets easier because then you have, what we do is very specific. It's extremely meticulous. Sometimes it's very boring and frustrating, and it takes a really long time because when we start digging, especially when we do our stuff about, and please don't publish this anywhere online, but when we look for different companies and who they may be linked to, you go down a rabbit hole of people and institutions and companies, and is this guy tied to this guy, is this guy tied to this guy? And we have, sometimes I was dreaming our board at work because we have all these drawings and who connects to who. But the more you do those stories, the more people come to you because after a while, after both sides of an argument scream that you're working for this side, no, you're working for this side, and then all of a sudden everybody hates you, people know that you're not affiliated, and you've shown over the years that in your work, like I do not accept, one of the things that really, really annoys me with our media is that you can have all kinds of accusations flying around without any sort of consequence. Like, can I say that you look like you've murdered someone in your life without consequence, without asking you? So that, well, Anna says you've murdered someone, have you? And you say that's nonsense. You cannot decide, and I think that's the crime by omission, when media omits information that is crucial. We have interviewed like really sort of, you have terrible crooks, criminals, drug dealers, and you don't, people would say, but he's a criminal, why do you ask? Because he has a right to reply. Everybody has a right to reply. And in most cases, they will not want to talk and they will not want to give you information. But it's your duty. And if you're my journalist, you better give me email to see where you've sent them questions. If you spoke on the phone, I need to see, the call log. If you did an SMS, I need to see a print screen of the SMS, and you need to keep that on you because we don't know if in 2 weeks someone is not going to file a lawsuit and say we were not asked and so on and so forth. And that was what I wanted to say. But if you stick to like the most, the old rules of journalism and what you can do and what you can't do, you'll be fine. And that's how and that is when you can talk about integrity and credibility, not before, because that is how you do that. Your work speaks about that, and that's why for instance, whenever we do a story, I always to this day, not that I don't trust my journalists, of course I trust them all, but the questions that an editor asks are always the same. How do we know this is true? And how do we prove it? And you cannot give me an answer, we know this because, I don't know, Top Channel or RT has published it. That does not stand. You have no way of knowing whether RT has got it wrong or not. So that is not credible information unless you can prove it, or you can go back to the source. If the topic was whether, I don't know, someone killed someone, there has to be zillion other ways how to check. To go back to the earlier story about the guy who claimed that he went to the hospital. It took time to check with the hospital and get on record that no such patient was ever admitted or had asked for help. Okay, you can hear me, right? Okay. I don't know why I can't hear for some reason, but if you can hear me, that's fine. Okay. Do you have any other questions? I think something is off. I don't know why.
No, I think that the secret is that our girls might be a little bit tired because usually you can't get the word because they're just popping in and commenting and so on. So girls use this opportunity because Anna Petruseva is one of the best professionals in the field. She was chosen, she was picked by a hand, to be here and to help you with her expertise. So try to figure out what she just said and what you see on the television or read in the newspapers, and how does it infect you. The right word, infect you.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and how actually could you make the difference or so? Because in, let's say, in my experience, on a Facebook, when I see really intelligent and educated people, sharing really stupid stuff, with the sources that are not being checked, there are some obscure websites or whatever. I always, ask myself, did you think like for 3 seconds before posting this kind of stuff? And that's very often.
Yeah, but that's why.
Sorry.
That's why the previous example I mentioned, the example I mentioned with our colleagues today about how on 15th of July they would vaccinate us as part of the Melinda and Bill Gates project. That kind of news, we had a debate today, like, do you just deny that this is, you say this is, someone had made this in Photoshop on Facebook and Twitter? And is that enough? Or do you need to actually post news on your website? And the debate was more in the line that, as you say, it is so stupid, but then I'm sorry, but we kind of get proof every day in different forms that people are falling for that kind of crap. And that, in that respect, I also think that we have to be more aggressive in the pushback. And for instance, my advice to my colleague was that it is not enough for them to just post that on their social media platforms, but that they need to go a step further. But then he says, but my audiences know better. But do they really? Because your audiences know better, but your audiences associate your logo with credibility. So what if your audiences are now taking this for granted and sharing it furthermore? So in the end, they did. Post the information online as well, which I think was a good thing to do.
I want to ask you if you have. I suppose you have a lot of experience like this. What I will tell, when an official avoids an answer, and he talks with you in a friendly way, so you have an impression that everything is okay, but the fact is that he avoids answer. So I have, in this moment, I have problem. It is not the most important thing for my article, but I see that one official doesn't want to answer me, will they do something in future? I suppose that he doesn't want to say, yes, of course, we will do like this, because if they don't do it like that, and if he says, yes, we will do it, somebody can read that article that I hope I will finish soon and can say, okay, you said that, but you didn't do it. So I suppose that that is the problem. But the fact is that I asked him at least 2 or 3 times by email.
Okay.
I told him, you didn't answer me the second question. And at the end, I called him and I said, but this is the 4th time you didn't tell me. And he said, but of course we will do it. And I said, okay, but write to me, please, because without official answer, I can't use it in my article. So I feel, how do you feel in those situations? Are you embarrassed? Because I am in this situation.
No, I think
I feel that my question.
No, I think that's a common trick that politicians use. But I think that I am in my office. I am regarded as too lenient towards people that do not want to answer. In a sense that I am always the one that it is most generous with time. So, for instance, if we ask someone something, all my journalists, if they could choose, they would say they have to answer now, immediately, and I tell them, give them time, especially when it is problematic stories. And then if they don't answer, I say call again, and we log in that call as well. And then at the end, we say we called them 6 times, and still they did not provide answers. This guy, from what you're saying, he is not going to give you the answer. So you have 2 options. Either stop asking and just write that he's not going to give you the answer, or I would also advise to be generous with time. You send him one final email and you say, I will publish my article tomorrow morning, so today is your last day to respond. Please respond to the question and write the question again. So you have the email where you have the question. And then you can say, despite numerous attempts, he avoided to answer, because he avoids. He doesn't, well, I guess, yeah, he failed to avoid, yeah. Hope that helps. Okay.
You mentioned 2 interesting things, one of which is off topic. I think so. The first one would be concerning conspiracy theories. So I've dealt with people that are consumed by this information. It's about, amongst others, the 5G network and so on. I'm thinking about what is the crux of the problem and what is the solution. So you've said that I believe that it is a problem of mistrust. So the general public does not trust any institutions. Yes, precisely. So they think that the academia is corrupt, that everyone that has any source of power or money or whatever is corrupt, and they tend to lean towards alternative information that are usually just like
from
speculation, speculative. So would the solution be to, in any way you can try and create trust among the readers. Not just as a general rule, you have to have like people that trust your sources so that you will be read, but also like, is that the solution to the stop of spreading false information? Is that the key?
Well, I think it's kind of a combination. I think it's whether it's, debunking and stuff. I mean, look, we are now living in a time where huge number of the population believes the earth is flat. So that's kind of difficult to grasp to begin with. And then how do you fight that when people are telling you that, the earth is flat? What we try to do is, for instance, when these 5G theories exploded, and it was all about how 5G is we're all gonna die and this and that. And there was a lot of misinformation with taking old news about whether 5G technology would be introduced and spinning that. We found some famous engineer who lives in Norway, I think, who is Macedonian, but is an expert, who explains what 5G does and what are the effects of 5G. And I remember the headline of the interview was 5G spreads corona as much as the earth is flat. So one way of kind of approaching things is to like, for instance, when these stories started spreading, what we looked at is we did analysis of where these stories first appeared, on which websites, then how were they disseminated on Facebook, and through which through which profiles. And then we looked at separate profiles and their political agendas. And that brings me back to the initial point I was making about media. That is one strong argument that you could give to the public, is when you show them who is behind the information that is being served to them, because that particular piece of information is served to them for a bigger purpose or goal, whether it is discrediting opponents, propaganda, stealing elections, or this or that, instigating some riots, or overall and most commonly undermining trust in institutions.
Yes, but also, why are people falling for these information in particular? Like, even if we expose one or two sources, there is still the problem that anytime another theory comes up, people will still, believe it because.
Yeah, but that's a much wider problem, and that's the problem of lack of education and poor education, and the fact that terrible education system was further disrupted in the past years as different, I would say different autocrats systemically worked on kind of, how should I put that, lowering the level of quality in education. And that's particularly worrying. But I don't think that media can solve that. That requires a much larger societal and political action.
Also, another question, and then I'll stop. Do you think that it is a good idea to listen to both sides and then compare the story? Like, find the sources on your own, and then find the people disseminating the information, or the people that believe in a certain conspiracy theory.
If this is something that I call the fake balance thing. I don't believe in it. That the fake balance thing is 5 minutes for the Jews, 5 minutes for Hitler. I think that media who are using that as a model are doing far more damage, and they're doing it under the disguise of freedom of speech and so on and so forth. If I find who are the people disseminating that, and I can prove that, I don't need to ask them. I mean, I can ask them why they're doing that, and I can ask them specifically if I want to go further. If I want to prove that they are paid by a political center or that they have ties to a political center, I would ask them. I would not kind of label them in any way without giving them right to reply. But if I have proof that they're disseminating it, I don't need to ask them whether they disseminate it. You see
yes, but you can dig into it a bit more and see the motives
But dig into what? Because I think that there is a red line that, like, what? Am I going to debate with this guy whether 5G is really spreading coronavirus or not? And he knows that because he's Googled it. These are people who are not. It's one thing if you have relevant sources. And when I say relevant, I mean relevant for the topic that we're talking about. So if we're talking about COVID, I will listen to epidemiologists, virologists, anyone who has some sort of background, experience, knowledge, education on the certain topic. I would definitely not listen to the woman who is looking into, peas or coffee and telling me that I'll meet a tall, dark stranger. See what I mean? It's just, you cannot, that is why I am saying that you cannot give, and this is also one of the biggest problems in our media, especially in TV, because we have now reached a stage where you have TV debates where you have two doctors, and then you have two lunatics from Facebook who are not doctors. They don't have any education, but they have Facebook groups that vaccines cause autism. And they get the same time to sit at the same table with doctors, and for matters to be worse, because the two Facebook lunatics are far more savvy in the media game, they shout and scream, and the end result is that the two lunatics were louder, thus they won, and the result is what? Vaccines cause autism? No, but that is the impression that the public will get. So I am not the one to recommend that kind of balance. I think that journalists should really just, stick to whoever is relevant for a certain topic.
I think Una wanted to say something. No. Okay, I'm wrong.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry. I hope I didn't make you feel sleepy. I know it's been a long day for you. Do you have maybe any other comments or questions? Yes.
I want to ask you, what is the real impact of the investigative stories today?
The real impact? Well, it depends how you look at it. For instance, for me, real impact is when an investigation gets opened, when there is a court case, when there is Like, for instance, I was very proud. We had a story in December about how a power plant that is a state power plant, how it is wasting millions on outsourcing companies for equipment and vehicles instead of just buying that. So instead of just buying the whole thing for 40 million euros, they have so far spent 200 million euros because they're giving it to different companies. And the week after the story was published, the prime minister and the director of the company came out, held a press conference, and announced that they would open a bid, buy the equipment. It still hasn't happened, so we don't know whether it will happen. But I would be very. But I think that is something that I consider as impact. Or, for instance, we published like there were for months protests on this this opening of a mine that was deemed very problematic for the environment by activists, and there were numerous protests and so on. And we managed to find the contract that they had with the government because it was a foreign investor, and we did a big story about how, according to the contract, the government could easily annul the agreement, stop the contract, because the company already didn't fulfill what it was supposed to do in certain deadlines. And a week later, the government broke off the contract, citing kind of the same reasons. So that was, I don't know, we've done quite. I think we've been lucky that we've had quite a few stories that have had that type of impact. I think that's sort of, or if you have enough, or if it piles enough public pressure to then force authorities to make a move on certain issues.
There are some investigative journalists that said that sometimes when they publish the story, there is no impact, but several times happened that, for example, 6 months later, 1 year later, that story.
We had a story a couple of years ago that was so difficult, and it was so tedious, and it was so boring because it was so many documents and tenders and bids, and it was so complicated, so difficult to understand. In a nutshell, it was about a government procurement bid for cleaning services, but worth 10 million euros because it was for many institutions for many years and so on. And a journalist of mine was going through those documents, and he says, this looks interesting, this and that. And for 3 months, he was analyzing documents, speaking to people, interviewing people, and he did a story about how, in fact, that particular government bid was, in fact, written to fit that particular company who received it. And then but it wasn't that simple as I'm saying it, because it was a complicated schemes through many companies and so on. We published it. I think that maybe only 5 of us in the office, we read it, and that was it. Nobody could. So it was so complicated. 2 years later, we get a call from the financial police. They say, we are opening a case based on your story. They started indictments and so on. So, I mean, it hasn't gone anywhere, but it was a nice surprise. And then everybody was trying to find which was this story. And the financial police tried to do a press conference to explain what was going on, but nobody could understand because it was so complicated. So in the end, they told them, just read the Byrne story. Yeah. Okay. Well, I hope I didn't take too much of your time and that this was interesting enough to keep you awake. So it's been a pleasure. I hope I'll see you soon live.
It was a pleasure, definitely, Anna. You were fantastic. I knew that you would do your thing, the way that I imagined. We'll stay in contact. There is a possibility that some of the participants choose you as a mentor. So we'll see, what happens in the future. And also, we are having this promotional event in, let's say, end of September. So you will be, let's hope, having in mind the COVID situation and everything, be able actually to participate, in person in promotion of the video, in promotion of the publication that Jarka is doing, evaluation, but of authorship text by Tamara Skroza, but also the works that our girls have done. So that would be fabulous.